Actually, I don't know if you can give him that verse. You know what he said about Nancy taking the communion? So it says, so 1 Corinthians 11 and 27.
Growing sick and dying. Getting sick and dying. Receiving communion unworthily.
Well, yeah. It says, wherefore, whoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. Let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. For if we would judge ourselves, we should not... Oh no, that's the second one. Yeah.
2 Corinthians?
No, 1 Corinthians 11. 27.
Well, we're not saying though that she will grow sick and die.
Yeah, because
certainly it was happening in St. Paul's time, and certainly it is a risk for those who are so wanton in their approach to sacred things, because a Protestant who would do what she's done in ignorance would not be at risk, because they're doing it in ignorance. But she is raised in the old faith. She knows exactly what she's doing.
Well, but you say in ignorance, but why would you say she'd be doing it in ignorance?
Well, it's possible. A Catholic today doesn't know necessarily that this is the body and blood of Christ. He'll swan up to communion, just having gone to bed with his girlfriend, and just what I used to do many decades ago.
Right.
I had not a clue.
So, yeah, I see what you're saying. So what you're saying is the Protestants are not preaching it properly.
No, the Catholics aren't preaching it properly. So the Catholics.
All right. Yeah. Well, and Protestants as well. I suppose.
Yeah, but talking about Pelosi.
Yeah.
A born and bred Catholic. She was raised in the faith in a way that I wasn't, because I was raised in the faith of the modern times.
Right.
She's the old style Catholic, so she knows.
Yeah.
It was drilled into them.
Well, the fact she went to it shows she knows what it means, isn't it? The fact she flew all the way to the Vatican, so she knew the. But that's an interesting one.
And the Vatican, that's interesting. The Vatican gave it to her. That means, and that's the citadel. They are the, so to speak. Excuse me.
It's okay, mate. Sorry.
They are custodians of proper Catholicism.
Yeah.
Like they understand it. Much better, and they gave it to her. So why do you think? Because they did that, and they are in error.
Because there are wicked people even at the very top echelons of the church. This happens at times. They gain positions because of various movements that go on. It can go on. This process can go on over 200 years to get to where we are now, and it's not noticed for a long time. And then suddenly, even the non-Catholic world sees what people like me and other Catholics knew was going on some decades ago, but wasn't obvious to those outside.
What was I going to say? Yes. So you know the verse that I just read there. Could that be used to rebuke in like a textual way what the Vatican did? Because they're effectively complicit in her potentially
in her sacrilege.
Yeah.
Sacrilege to unworthily, knowingly receive the Holy Eucharist, which is for us the absolute summit of our religion.
Yeah.
No matter how bizarre to outsiders that may seem, that is the fact for us. She knows that. These priests know that. Now she's a crook. She's a literal crook because she became rich and her husband became rich on insider dealing on stocks and shares. You don't, unless she's a brilliant stock trader, but that's like,
But you're right.
Yeah. However, putting aside the actual mundane crookery, the spiritual crime of knowing what the Eucharist is and then going to receive it sacrilegiously won't go unanswered by God in this life or the next. But that she's just a crook, as I say. The prelates in the Vatican are there to be guardians, shepherds of the sheepfold Jesus, after all, created with great take the greatest pain and suffering. So it's no joke. These guys, some of these guys in Germany, in Holland, in the Vatican, they take the mick. They're taking the mick out of Jesus now.
I know.
So they are in for a big bad time. Now, I know what you're saying, it's judgmental. But at this stage I can't help myself. They're on the road to hell. Another bunch of guys. But as I said earlier to some of the other guys, there's St. John Chrysostom, who's a doctor of our church, so he's a major figure, St. John. He said that the floor of hell is paved with the skulls of Catholic bishops. So we can say, if St. John, in the 5th century AD, could say what he said, who am I to kind of like not say what I'm saying with far less eloquence than Mr. Goldenmouth did?
So with what happened there, so you know like how we had the problem with in Acts 15, and they had to go to Jerusalem to have a council to iron things out.
Yeah.
So now this particular problem with Nancy Pelosi, is this one of those unironable situations where because they're the boss and all the people who disagree around are just the minions, they literally can't do that anymore? So now the bosses, they just get to rule and make whatever decisions they want.
No, what happens is Jesus established the church in such a way that it's indestructible and cannot be influenced by the Catholic ordinary laity. The reason he did this is because it needs to be impervious to erroneous movements of thought.
Yeah.
The only thing that can harm it is if those within that structure become corrupt. And that's what's happened. And that's the problem. But we can't therefore break into the structure and clean house. In fact, that's practically a hopeless idea anyway, because if you try to have a reformation, it all goes bad. Like if you try to have a revolution against the king, it always goes bad. In France, the Americans are worse off because they overthrew King George, I believe, and monarchs overthrown everywhere. The countries that overthrow them are in a worse position, in my view, than they would have been had they retained their monarchs.
That's true, because like over here it's quite peaceful, and it's only the politicians that overthrew one king. So, but then they put the king back because they obviously knew that having the king does make a difference to the way the people.
Well, in our kingdom, it was King Charles III's predecessor by name, Charles II, who was restored to the throne, and he set about hunting down all the men who signed his father, Charles I, death warrants.
Yeah.
And he did so successfully. Cromwell himself, the arch-villain, was dead already. But Charles got the rest. And the turmoil that England had gone through was relieved by Charles II. And may our good new king take note, Charles II was a Catholic. Charles II kept it secret. On his deathbed he revealed it.
Right.
Unlike his brother, his successor King James II, who revealed his conversion to Catholicism while an adult and paid the price for it, I might say, by traitorous dogs. But that's another story. Still, this was a great Catholic line, and I hope and pray to our God that our good King Charles III will see what his predecessor Charles II saw and comes back to the Holy Faith. And if not him, then his son, by the grace of God, to be the next king, will do so.
Because I was talking about that. So you know how
let me interrupt you and say this: that King Charles, when he was made king, and he said, defender of the faith, the papal title given to him, defender of the faith and upholder of the Protestant faith, he said, King Charles.
Right.
And I would that it was so that he would uphold the Protestant faith in England. I would accept that. To uphold the 16th century Protestant faith in these islands, it would advance British spirituality so far to do that. And then, once you uphold the Protestant faith, you have fertilised the soil for the restoration of the Catholic faith. But I interrupted you.
Well, I was just saying. So what do the Catholics think about his little Mrs Simpson?
The Queen Consort, my dear man.
Right.
You can't speak like that now.
What?
Who was he talking about? Who was he talking about?
Camilla.
Oh, okay.
But it's early days, so you forgive.
Okay.
If I can ask.
One second.
Well, he did ask. I shall answer him.
Yeah.
Just and then you do yours. Basically, yes, she was married and divorced. Charles married after Diana had died, so his marriage to Diana is not relevant. But Camilla's marriage was relevant. However, he remains our liege. He remains the one to whom we owe fealty, to whom we owe our subjection as subjects. Because the mere fact that he is king cannot be undermined by sins he may have committed or may commit in the future, immoral lifestyle he may lead. That's not relevant. As St. Paul says in Romans chapter 13, pray for the emperor. Now, whatever Charles's faults are, they're not the faults of the emperor of Rome at the time of St. Paul. So Paul was acknowledging the emperor, against whom we are not to rebel. Charles, our king and lord, against whom we are not to rebel.
Yeah, but I suppose I could see why it would just be okay for him, simply because of they didn't do anything to Henry VIII. So if Henry VIII could do it, then there's nothing wrong with him doing a similar thing.
It's not so much that. Obviously the faith was overthrown, so there was an effort to do something with Henry. He was forbidden from contracting the marriage with Anne Boleyn. He went against the authority of the Holy Church, and he then engaged in a religious revolution, which went further than he intended, far further than he intended. But when you leave the door ajar for Satan, he's not just going to say, "Oh, I'll peer inside." He'll ram it open and bring the hordes of demons in with him. That's as Jesus said. You clean the house of your soul, but you don't put in the faith. Then, as an empty, clean house, Satan will bring back all his demons because it's a vacuum. Well, anyway, that was Henry. Today, of course, the Protestant faith is the established faith. But I just want to say that if it were to be truly restored, I would be rejoicing in the streets in this country, because this country would advance spiritually so much from where it is today.
Oh, because that's what I was gonna. Because I forgot about it before. You said about so you want to bring back the Catholic rule over the church in England. That's what you're saying.
Oh, the king is to be the chief guardian of the Catholic faith. That was where England was. That was the king's role.
Right. Do you know? I don't know if you know in history. Do you know the reasoning why William Tyndale was burnt?
Well, Henry didn't like him, and because Tyndale rejected the marriage to Boleyn. Henry didn't like that, so if he had got hold of him, he would have burnt him.
Tyndale was Tyndale a Catholic? Was it?
No, Protestant.
He was Protestant.
Now, where was Tyndale burnt it here?
No, I think it was Geneva, wasn't it?
Geneva. Maybe you're right. I can't remember why.
But what I was asking that is I was reading up on it, and one of the reasons
I may be wrong about Tyndale, about what was his position on the marriage, the royal marriage. Go on anyway.
Yeah.
But he was way, like you said, he went further than what Henry intended in terms of beliefs and these things. Well, there is one person here, like Richard, who believes he reads a Tyndale Bible.
All right.
Yeah, a very interesting guy. I think he's quite Gnostic in his approach.
So he won't even accept the King James Bible?
No, he doesn't like King James Bible. He thinks that's a corrupted
That's
one.
a novelty.
But based on Tyndale, then?
He believes in the Tyndale Bible.
You know these Protestants, if you can find a sect between two slices of ham, they'll find one. The space will be enough.
So what I was reading up, it said that apparently one of the problems, and apparently King Henry at the beginning enforced this, was that apparently it was illegal to do translations of the Bible from Latin.
And there was a prohibition on simply anyone translating the Bible into the English tongue. But there were many, many translations of parts of the New Testament into the Anglo-Saxon tongue.
Yeah.
There are many. I've got a book called English Virgins by a man called Hugh Pope, which talks about this. And a book by Henry Graham called Where We Got the Bible, Our English Bible. So it predates the King James Version. And in fact, the Catholic Douay Rheims Bible is from 1582 in the New Testament, and the King James, of course, is 3 decades later, 1611.
What did you say, 15? Oh yeah, 3 decades. Yeah, decades, yes.
Yeah. So we've got, but they have to be authorised by the church. Otherwise you'll end up with all kinds of nonsense. Remember the Breaches Bible? Somebody wrote a Bible, some Protestant guy in England. He didn't like the fact of the idea of Adam and Eve being naked, so he said God clothed them with breeches.
Oh, yeah, breeches. Yeah.
It's called the Breaches Bible.
Yeah.
But that's a frivolous problem. But you know, the translations of the Bible can be really bad, like the Jehovah's Witness. Like the Jehovah's Witness Bible. The Catholic Church is there to ensure that doesn't happen. They must be authentic. They must be, as you would be familiar with the term, authorised versions.
Yeah. So
is that why they were sort of reluctant to just like allow anybody to just read it or translate it as they saw fit?
We knew what would happen, and it did happen.
Well, this is always the problem, isn't it? Because when people read the same book, they can come to different interpretations.
Yes. So you need to have scholars who will translate in a way which the guardian of the scriptures can say, you can trust this version. When you go and read it in your house, you can trust it. Because Tom's, Dick's and Harry's have made their own translations down the century since the Reformation. And many of them just can't be trusted.
I was just going to read this. This is from vintagenews.com. It says, historically speaking, translating the Bible was not as innocent as one might assume. More than a few cases speak that such an act at some point was deemed heretic by the church. Hence translators were denounced and even put to capital punishment in front of watching crowds. So here's why I brought that up, is who would have put that like death sentence on doing translations? Which organisation?
The church would pronounce it as heretical, but the church would not pronounce a death sentence. The church hands over miscreants to the secular arm to deal with as it sees fit. And in those times, the secular arm saw burning at the stake and other means of capital punishment as suitable for the crimes of heresy and other crimes related to matters of religion.
Right. So you're saying that when you say secular, are you talking about the actual priests in that country?
No, the king.
So it's the king.
The bishops of the country would find the heretic guilty and then hand him over to the secular arm for punishment.
Right, but wouldn't it be the religious part that determines the sentence?
No, it wouldn't pronounce death. It would pronounce that the person's guilty of the crime of heresy, say. Like, for example, St. Joan of Arc was found guilty in a show trial, scandalously, of the crime of heresy. But she was not, the church tribunal did not say she is to be burned at the stake. She was handed over to the secular arm, which decided to burn her at the stake. Of course, in practice, everybody knows they're like that.
Right.
And this means burning. What I'm trying to get at is, though, in Catholic political theory, this is how it is. And we must speak of political theory because this is how we understand how things will operate in different times and places.
Right.
The underlying principles. You might say, well, it isn't right anyway to do this. Fair point. But that's really, I don't like to look in the past and say, oh, they were wrong. Each has its own time.
Right.
We through time, particularly in the Christian kingdoms, we advance, we move forward. Other civilizations don't. They're wretched. You know, they just carry on, whether it be enslaving, as the Muslims do, or just treating other people like dirt, like the Hindus do. We can't constantly advance. But that doesn't mean we're always going to be at the perfect place that Jesus wants us to be at the beginning. When the monks went and created Christendom, they infused the Christian king, well, they infused the pagan kings that converted to Catholicism with a new idea. That didn't mean those kings totally abandoned their pagan ways. The seed was planted and it would develop, it would germinate and grow over the centuries as the English kingdoms particularly began to develop, consolidate and gradually become one kingdom. And then the whole realm, the whole island became one united kingdom. Then we see the Christian principles that the Catholic Church has given to those kings when, say, men like St. Augustine of Canterbury came here from under Pope Gregory I's instruction. We see the improvement of morals throughout the realm. And then we see that if we widen the scope to the rest of Europe, Scandinavia. These were bad pagans. You know, if an Englishman was unfortunate enough before this land was Christian, before the Scandinavia was Christianized, to be caught, an English king in his petty kingdom being caught by some Vikings, he could expect to be opened up when he was alive, to be put on a rock, to have his lungs taken out, and to be spread out around him like two wings of a kind of angel.
Yeah, that's what the Vikings were.
The Vikings were creative in their paganism, but that's what our monks had to deal with in converting these people. And when you look at what has been achieved on the eve of the Reformation, this was what we call the highest civilization by that point. All by the work of our priests and monks. And of course the Holy Spirit.
Well, yeah.
What is the situation then during the Reformation? I don't know how much you're know about the history, but from like the historical perspective, what was the situation of an English man or woman who was also a Catholic? How did they navigate this kind of situation?
Well,
because things have changed so much. I mean, how did they? Were there any left, or did they have to leave abroad, or how did it work?
Well, some fled abroad.
Okay.
Some were eventually born as Protestants as the Elizabethan age rolled on.
Okay. Just
like Edmund Campion, a great leading scholarly light. But when he converted, he, like others who converted, left England not to flee, but to train at Douay to be priests, and then they come back secretly, knowing eventually they'd be caught and hanged, drawn and quartered.
Which is what happened to it.
Yeah, not the pleasant mere hanging that we ended up doing in our country until the Murder Act was passed in 1965. However, these men who were in England at the time of the royal marriage of Henry VIII, they would have to decide what to do, and at first everybody went along with the king out of sheer terror. But then you've got the Carthusian monks who said, no, we're not having this, and they were taken to execution and hanged, drawn and quartered. But they did not accept the king's right to do what he was doing. And so the long bloody river began to flow, which didn't end in England for a long time. Other Englishmen accommodated themselves to this new regime, and accommodation was dizzying. Eamon Duffy talks about how you become a Henrician Catholic in his reign. Then when his son Edward becomes king, Edward VI in his short reign, you then become more Protestant. Then, when you get Queen Mary, she is like bringing the Catholic faith back. So you then become fully Catholic again, and all the Protestants have to hide. Then she dies without issue. Philip of Spain returns to Spain, so there's no military threats for the Protestants to worry about, and so they bring back Protestantism, and again the Catholics have to switch again and convert. And of course during Elizabeth's reign it becomes harder and harder because the Pope maybe makes a tactical error in declaring the Queen an outlaw, and so that means any king can invade England and topple her. That then makes being a Catholic treason. And thus the screw turns for the Catholics of England. within 100 years, most Catholics in England are saying down with the Pope.
Oh, really?
Because this is what you can do with people. This is why, if you look at the country I was born into, is almost unrecognisable to the average Englishman today. Because the people have a certain plasticity to them.
Yeah.
They can be manipulated quite easily. The English of Elizabeth's day during her long reign could be turned from Catholics, from being Catholics for 1,000 years, to being Protestants within less than a century.
Yeah.
Just as here, within less than a century, the English have been turned from what they had as a set of beliefs in the beginning of the 60s to what they have in this beginning of the third decade of the 21st century. So what we can see is how you do it is you look at the adults, like in England, the adults when I was born. Some of the things that are said today, the adults would never accept. They would regard them as just appalling ideas on the moral level. One doesn't have to spell out what these things are. But what organisations, the cultural leaders like the BBC especially, would do, they'd say, all right, the adults of the 1960s, we're not really interested in them, we can't change them, but we'll get the kids. So all the children of my generation were raised by the BBC, because by the 1960s, a television is in every home. Pretty much by the majority of homes by the end of the 50s, or certainly by the early 60s, in every home. Black and white TV, but still, it does the trick. And that is pumping out moral garbage. Subtly at first, because if it didn't do it too subtly, the adults who were still in positions of dominance, the World War II generation, would go mental and prevent it any more doing this. You know, what the BBC would do then, they wouldn't have Drag Queen Story Hour then. They'd have a series like Till Death Us Do Part, which you may not have heard of, you young fella. It won loads of comedy awards. The Americans would know it as a series called All in the Family, which they started running in the 1970s, their version. But this Till Death Us Do Part involves this racist man called Alf Garnett and his wife Elsie. She's like a long-suffering wife. She doesn't say much, but when she does, she shows she's like not going to put up with this fella too much. He's got a son-in-law, Tony Booth. Now you may know Tony Booth because his daughter in real life was Cherry Booth, who became the wife of Tony Blair. Tony Booth in this series is playing a Labour supporter. Alf Garnett is a hardline Tory. Tony Booth, though, is not just a left-winger, he's in real life a left-winger, but he is in the series as well. And his wife, Una Stubbs, is the daughter of Alf Garnett. So that's the scene. Now, take for example, the 1966 Christmas episode, which is thankfully somebody managed to preserve, because the BBC, either out of sheer stupidity or deliberate corruption, wiped lots of the tapes. They did this with episodes of Doctor Who as well. Useless organisation in so many ways, never mind in its corruption of morals. But anyway, going back to this Christmas 1966 episode, it opens in this living room and the camera is panning around the dining room table. The Queen, God rest her soul, her Christmas broadcast has just been finished, because every 3 o'clock we're going way back into the 1950s, so it's finished and the national anthem is playing, and so they're sitting there just fed up. Tony Booth, his wife, Alf's wife, they've had the Christmas turkey and they're digesting it and they're bored, and then there's one chair empty. And then camera pans out further, and there's Alf standing up straight because the national anthem is playing. And it's a great source of comedy. It's a brilliant piece of writing. But you see, men used to stand and women used to stand for the national anthem. But of course, it was going out of fashion. And the key thing there is not just to have a comedy moment, but this shows, though the BBC are thieves, sucking the blood by the licence fee of poor people to line their over-bloated wallets, they deserve their money in a sense that they are so clever. They create comedy, not for a mere frivolous purpose, but to make the British people mock monarchy mock the national anthem by making fun of Alf Garnett, who is a comic figure, a comic racist. Now, by making him so absurd, what they do, you've got people, and the Jewish guy who played him, Warren Mitchell, he would say, he'd go around, and there'd be people saying, oh right, yeah, you rot thing, those blacks, etc, etc, and he'd say, look mate, I'm not laughing with you, I'm laughing at you, because the character of Alf was to show up racists, you see, but it's a subtle thing, and lots of people wouldn't get it, and one might say, oh well, that's a failure by the BBC, it promoted racism. Here's what, in my mind, is going on. The BBC knew there's a risk. They will promote racism amongst the adult, white, working class population of the 1960s, but it's worth the risk, because what will happen is, you will get the young people who are watching Till Death Us Do Part to really disdain this fool who says things like, we'll just get Wilson out, who was the Labour Prime Minister at the time, and then we'll get the empire back. Right? It's just hilarious. But he's made a figure of fun. And that's how the BBC undermines British traditional values. Through the cleverest comedy you can imagine. I would almost take my hat off to them if I wouldn't line them up against a wall.
But you, as far as you think, because the way I see, for example, the way I mean British, I don't know about British, but I would say like the English, for example, they still retain some aspects of Catholicism, in the sense, for example, their like their sense of care towards social problems, or like dealing with the homeless, or whatever it may be. So they've retained a lot of sort of what I would consider to be sort of Catholic ideas.
Yes.
So would you agree with that? Would you think that regardless of these social, religious, political changes of, you know, now it's an Anglican church, and you know, there's a lot more Protestant. There's all kinds of Protestant sects. You know, the Quakers have quite a rich history here, but they all tend to be. Even the type of Protestantism, it's quite Catholic in its sort of like concern for people, concern for social issues. So would you say that they've retained these so-called Catholic characteristics?
Without a doubt. England was for 900 years plus, almost 1,000 years Catholic before the Reformation. And when we got the new church, the Anglican Church, it was the least Protestant of all the Protestant religions. It took on the hierarchy of Catholicism, the idea of bishops and priests, parishes, and the sacraments. It even made a saint of the king, James and Charles I. And so it, being the mildest form of Protestantism, ensured that England would be the best Protestant country in Europe. And so it was. It basically retained the vast amount of Catholic values. Yes, Henry destroyed the monasteries and thus destroyed the welfare state of the Middle Ages, because that was for the poor. That's where they found food and a bed and medicine.
Well, the monks were homeless after destroying.
Yes, and Henry's poor law did nothing in comparison. Though he saw, by creating the poor law, he saw the ruin he had brought about in England by the dissolution of the monasteries, the rape of the monasteries actually. Everything that is about Britain, its parliament, its monarchy, this is all, its entire unwritten constitution, its people and their mores. It is a Catholic nation. Without Catholicism, this would not be recognisable. So yes, I agree with you. And so I think I may finish now on that live.
I was trying to look up the history regarding Tyndale. And it says educated at Oxford and working at Cambridge, Tyndale was unsurprisingly denied permission by the church to work on a Bible translation from Latin into English. He sought better luck in Germany, and by the summer of 1525, his take on the New Testament was ready to be shipped to England. The invention of the printing press allowed for faster production of copies. Even though Tyndale was working from outside England, he was still in an extremely dangerous business. He was always on the run, changing locations to remain safe from secret agents, until he was betrayed in Antwerp. Like his colleagues detained over the same wrongdoing, Tyndale too received a death sentence. He was burned at the stake in 1536 near Brussels. A similar fate followed dozens caught owning a copy of his Bible or trying to sneak one into Britain. So, so the reason why I brought all this up in the first place was you wanted the Catholics to be back to the way of the Catholic, the Church in England. So, do you think this would follow them?
Well, firstly, all Bibles must be authorised by the Catholic Church, because we cannot trust the private enterprise of a translator at all. We know that with you know that with the Jehovah's Witnesses. No doubt if the Mormons created a Bible, it wouldn't be worth the paper it's written on. So there has to be a supreme authority, otherwise nothing can be trusted in translation work, because we don't know about these translators. They may be of goodwill, but they may not be. We just don't know. We need the God-appointed organisation. If there's no such God-appointed organisation, we can never be sure of the Bible. We'd have to learn Greek, Latin and Hebrew ourselves, and then trust our own intellects to know what the sacred text is, and be able to go back to the original text to know that what we're reading is not just a false copy. So, if we have the Catholic Church restored here, there will be punishments for going against that. What they will be can vary from age to age.
Yeah.
It could be capital punishments. I'm not saying it wouldn't be, and I don't blanch at such things. I'm not a limp-wristed, flower in the flower bed kind of person. But I would not think that in this day and age it would be very prudent or good to have capital punishments for freelancing translations of the Bible.
Yeah, I agree.
No? But I don't look back and say, well, woof, I'm going to lose sleep over what was done in the past. Men did what they did in the past. Our crimes today are far worse than anything anybody's done in the past in Christendom's history. They never had a thought of abortion. Never thought that it would be justified in any case.
Yeah.
So we have nothing to say to men of the past. Just as men of the future shouldn't be able to say anything to us. You live in your own time, and you follow the light of the Holy Spirit as best you can.
Yeah.
That's all we can say, really.
All right, okay. I was just gonna. This was actually a different subject, but I thought I'd better say it because it's what happened, and it was a bit unfortunate. You might want to. I suppose you haven't got internet on.
Not now, not right now. No, it's on the phone, and that's hooked up. Yeah.
All right, because it's just something.
I trust you anyway. If you find out whatever it is.
No. Because what it is something that I have to. Because it's to do with the guy who's here with you, the older guy.
Henrik.
Yeah.
Oh right.
Yeah, I don't know if he told you about
the Polish guy.
No, you're the old guy who's he stands on here. He must be a priest.
Yeah, he was here, wasn't he? Went before me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Henrik.
Alright. Yeah, I don't know if he ever told you about the incident that happened.
No.
Alright, okay. You might want to have a look at the stream and actually see what was going on, and because it did get a little bit out of hand, not in a bad way, but I think he doesn't quite know how to handle certain of the more rowdy people.
Yeah.
And he actually got a bit angry.
When was that?
Oh, it was let me just find it. Well, what it is, I was actually recording when it happened.
All right.
So I just want to show you which stream it is, so you can just have a look at it.
Or you could send me a message on one of my videos, because because then I'd know. You can send me a message saying what it is.
All right.
So I could then click on it. You'd send me a link.
Yeah, no, it's got the time. Yeah, all right. Yeah.
But you know what? I've been out of hand many years ago.
Right.
I got well out of hand.
Yeah.
I won't go into it, but I did.
Yeah.
So I can't tell any. I can't give lessons to anybody.
Well, it's more what it was. He wasn't like staying on top of what. I think he wasn't expecting it. So, but see, this is how they are. So it's normal. So you obviously know how to handle it. But as they were sort of ganging up on him, he kind of cracked under the pressure.
Okay.
So I think maybe it's because he just hasn't done it Well, how long has he been coming here for?
A long time.
Yeah, so maybe just because the newer people are more rowdy than they were before.
Might be. Was this last week or?
No, this was like a month ago, I think.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to look at that, but yeah, I mean, these things can happen, right?
Yeah.
These things can happen. And there may come a time when, you know, the police drag me out of the park.
Well, I think
You never know.
all you have to really do is just maybe say to him that this is how it can be, so that he's used to it next time. Because it just seems as if I don't think he expected them to be as rude, and that's why he got to.
Judah is found in West
I mean,
Africa,
it would be nice to think people would be gentlemen.
Yeah,
But this is
I know,
the world we're not in.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
So I agree with you. You have to just say, maybe mentally say, right, it's going to be a hell today, and so you don't get surprised by anybody's ill manners.
That's right. Yeah.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
All right then.
All right then.
Done.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice.